Okay, great to see everyone tonight. Tonight we have Spear and Austin, and we have kind of shifted gears here. And as a church, we're reading through the Bible, so kind of got these broad categories of passages to read through. Tonight we're talking about the patriarchal period, and this is Genesis 12 through 50, and it deals with the patriarchs. Patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac. You name the others?
Jacob and Joseph.
Joseph. There you go.
Better than I.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. These are the patriarchs. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of have one discussion question about each of these four patriarchs. So, and Spears sitting in the question asking seat tonight. So let's go ahead and ask the first question. The first question obviously will be about Abraham. So read this first question if you would, Spear.
All right. Can you talk a little bit about the covenant God made with Abraham in Genesis 12? Kind of what is a covenant? Why did he make this covenant with Abraham? What are the basic elements of this covenant?
Okay. Well, let's talk about these. And I think the best way to kick that off is we'll have Austin read 12, 1 through 3. This kind of is the introduction to the covenant. The covenant is really found in Genesis 12, Genesis 15, and it's kind of also in Genesis 17. But we'll read in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, Austin will, and that'll give us some idea, and then we'll kind of jump into that question.
Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to tell the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed."
Okay. So God makes a covenant with Abraham. So the first thing we kind of now his name hasn't changed. Abraham here, it's Abram, but it's called the Abrahamic covenant God made with Abraham. So I think the first thing we want to kind of ask is, what exactly is a covenant? So any ideas of what a covenant is? Listen more carefully, you'll get it.
Syria
Syria interrupted our thing. But anyway, we won't let that slow us down. So what is a covenant?
I would say a promise or
An agreement.
a contract.
Yeah.
Yep.
Agreement, contract, yeah. And so God makes a covenant with Abraham. It is an agreement God makes with Abraham. Now, the important thing to remember about this covenant, and most of the covenants in the Bible are, with one big exception, most of these are unconditional covenants. And this is an unconditional covenant. In other words, when God makes a covenant, there's some things that Abraham has to do, but the fulfilling of the covenant, the agreement or contract, is not on Abraham's part, it's on God's part. He's the one that fulfills this. So a covenant is an agreement, a contract, a promise. So why does God make this covenant with Abraham? Why does God make this agreement with him? Well, let's kind of look back through some of the elements of it first. I think this will give us some idea. It said, first of all, let's look in chapter 12 at some of these. At the end of verse 1 of chapter 12, it says, "To the land that I will show you." So he's promising him some land. Okay?
Mm.
Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. So he's making him the promise of a land. And he said, "I will make of you a great nation." He's promising to make him a nation. A nation has to have land. A nation has to have a geographic area. A nation has to have borders. And so he said, "I'll make of you a great nation." And he said, "I will bless you." So he's promising a blessing. He said, "I'll make your name," so he's going to make his name great. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So God makes this covenant with Abraham, this promise of what he is going to do with Abraham, because he has a plan for Abraham. He has a plan. And you kind of say, okay, what is the plan that God has with Abraham? What is this Abrahamic covenant all about? Well, by the time you read through the Bible, by the time we get to it's kind of, this is 11 chapters. God creates man, and he creates him this beautiful garden, doesn't he? And man is created, have a relationship with God. God comes down and walks with man in the garden every day. And you have this beautiful scene and this beautiful relationship. And in 11 chapters, man has made it a total disaster. I mean,
Didn't take long.
Didn't take long, did it? 11 chapters, it is total chaos. So God, in a sense, makes his promise, this covenant, this contract with Abraham. His name is now Abram. It's going to be changed to Abraham. But basically what he said, okay, I'm starting over with one family. And he said, what I'm promising you is a land. I'm promising to make you a great nation. I will make your name great. And in you, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So this is a promise, this agreement that God is making with Abraham is that he's going to do something very, very special with the nation of Israel that will come forth from Abraham. And what do you think he means when he says, and those are the basic elements. There's a promise of land, promise of a nation, promise of a great land, promise of him being blessed, and the promise of him being a great nation. And so all these promises that God is making to him, he wants to do something clearly with Abraham. And so what is it that he wants to do with Abraham? What do you think he has in mind?
I think what he wants to do is ultimately he's going to create for himself a people to reveal himself to the world, and ultimately Jesus Christ will come from that covenant as well.
Right.
So he had to choose a people group, and specifically a person or a family, a bloodline for Christ to come.
And so Jesus comes through his family.
That's right.
Right. Okay. Very good. Because it'll say later that Jesus is of the house and lineage of David. And so that's very good. So he makes his covenant, he makes his promise. And so how long does this covenant last? Do you think, Austin? How long does this covenant last?
I have no idea. I imagine for a while.
Yep. It's actually a perpetual covenant. It's a never-ending
It's
covenant.
got to last long enough to play out Jesus coming.
Yeah. And so let me ask you this question, either one of you. So is this covenant going to come to an end when Jesus comes, or will this covenant even be in effect throughout eternity?
My initial thought was when Jesus returned, it would be the end. But as we were
That's where it served its purpose.
we were discussing last week, that even the nations will bring their glory into the New Jerusalem
And
in Revelation.
In the millennial reign, this kingdom will find its full, the nation of Israel will find its full promise, but then even throughout eternity, the kings of the earth bring their glory into the New Jerusalem. And that seems kind of strange, but, God delights in nations. He made many different nations, many different races, many different types of people. And even throughout eternity, there, in heaven itself, things are going to be divided up where there will be nations, because it says there clearly in Revelation 21 that before the Lord they'll bring the honor and glory of the nations. And it's a pretty fascinating thought if you think about it.
It
So,
is.
at any rate.
And I reckon really everybody that is there will be from the Abrahamic covenant.
Yeah,
because
well,
through Jesus.
Yeah, through Jesus. Yeah, in that sense, yes. In that sense, yes. I mean, there will be some different nations there, and so But anyway, that's kind of a neat thing to think of, how God does that forever, and so that's what the Abrahamic covenant is. So that kind of brings us to our first of our patriarchs, Abraham, and the covenant that God makes with Abraham, and the importance of this covenant, and how God uses it to really bring salvation to all the world. So, good. So let's talk about our second of the patriarchs. So Abraham has two sons. Remember what their names were? We'll start with an I. Ishmael and Isaac. Okay? And Isaac is the one that's born to Sarah, and he is the son of the promise. So read our second question, if you would, Spear.
All right. Isaac is born in Genesis chapter 21. Why is he called the son of promise? What does the name Isaac mean? How old were Abraham and Sarah when Isaac was born? Why did God test Abraham in Genesis 22 by asking him to offer up Isaac as a burnt offering?
Mhm.
You want me to ask you a few more? Or
Yeah, go ahead.
there?
Go ahead. We'll do the rest of
Okay.
them. Okay.
Do you think it was hard for Abraham to obey God in this test? And what really happened when he took Isaac up on the mountain?
Okay. A lot there. So let's dig into that. But let's go back and look at that in chapter 21, and let's read a couple of verses here. And so if you'll turn over to chapter 21, Austin, and we'll look at a couple of verses here. I think it will help us to understand kind of what is going on. And so, anyway, if you'll read the first 8 verses of chapter 21, that'll help us, I think, to
Okay.
give us some basis.
Then the Lord took note of Sarah, as had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac.
Okay, let's stop there. Okay. Now, okay, if you go back in that first verse that Austin read, it said that then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So he had promised her a son, okay? And so that's why he's called the son of the promise, because it was a promise that is made. Because how old are Abraham and Sarah when Isaac is born? How old they are?
I think Abraham was 100 and
Yep.
Sarah was 90.
Yep. So, how many 90-year-old first-time mothers do you know?
0.
Do you know any Austin?
That's like one of them things that pops up on your Google page, Randy. When you try to open up the internet.
That would be
is
kind of
true.
interesting.
That is true.
What's Google? What's the oldest mother? When she gave birth and stuff. I think
Yeah.
I may have heard. I heard of somebody maybe pushing 60 one time. But that
Wow.
would be,
I think I saw something about a woman in India. She was like 80 something.
well.
Wow.
Now we might want to
Is
check
that-
that so hard.
I'm telling
did you
that's
click
the
on the
stuff-
Google thing?
That's
Did
the
you
stuff
click
that pops up.
Sounded like you might have clicked on it.
Yeah. That's your TMZ newsfeed.
Yeah.
right there.
Okay. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, this is verifiable because God's word says it that she's 90. Okay, and so she has this son when she's 90, and it is a son of a promise. Now, remember what the name Isaac means? Give you a hint.
Is it laughter?
Yeah, laughter, because she laughed when the promise was made, and his name literally means laughter, because it's basically, okay, come on, I'm 90 years old, you're 89 when the promise is made. How am I going to be able to have a son? So Isaac's name means laughter. Okay, so Abraham is given a test, and the test is that he is to take and do something with Isaac. So turn over to chapter 22, if you will, Austin, and start reading in verse 1. And we're going to look at this great test that Abraham gets with Isaac.
Okay. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, I am here. Here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you.
Okay, so here is the test that Abraham gets. What is he told to do with Isaac? Offer him in that
As a
second,
burnt offering.
Yeah, burnt offering. What is left of a burnt offering?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Ash.
Ashes.
Ash, yeah.
Ashes. Yeah, ashes. But if you read these, one of the things we're doing is we go through this thing is encourage people to read the Bible. Burnt offering, if you look over that in Leviticus and stuff, and that's where it's established, even though we're before Leviticus here, obviously in Genesis. But so this is an offering. So when you burn this burnt offering, there's nothing left but ashes. So anyway, he's told to take Isaac and go up on the mountain and offer him as a burnt offering. So wait just a second. Let's kind of wrap our heads around this if we can. So here is Abraham, and he's how many years old when Isaac is born?
100.
Okay, let's just say some guesses here about how old Isaac is. 14, 15, 16. So that would put Abraham at what? 100, what?
114, 15,
16?
somewhere
Okay.
in there.
So, okay. Go offer your son as a burnt offering. Do you think this is hard for Abraham to do?
I would say
It'd be
yes.
hard for anyone to do.
Yeah. Is this, humanly speaking, is this the most important possession that Abraham has?
Humanly speaking, yes.
Yeah. Abraham's a rich guy. Abraham's got a lot of stuff. So if God said, go bring me some money, that wouldn't be a big deal. Offer 20 sheep or oxen or whatever, no big deal. But this was like, okay, this is like,
You've got to do something that's really testing his faith.
yeah, really testing his faith. And so let me ask you this. To be a test, does it really have to be something that's hard to do?
I think to be a test, yes.
Yeah, from
'Cause
God.
if it's not, it's not
Yeah.
really a test, I guess.
Yeah, so God says, bring me $10, in fact, sometimes the easiest thing to do is, throw some money at the church or something like that.
Sure.
But so this really, really, really is a very difficult test. Okay, we talked about this last week, that what is going on in Abraham's mind whenever all this is taking place? And the book of Hebrews kind of gives us a hint of what is taking place, because what it says there is that, okay, Abraham is thinking, book of Hebrews, I'm going to paraphrase this, that, well, I'll take my son up there and I'll offer him as a sacrifice, but God will raise him from the dead. So he's already got a scenario in his mind of how God can
Turn this around.
work this out. Because remember, he said that Isaac was the son of promise, and he's going to make of Isaac a great and mighty nation. He's going to have many descendants and all this stuff. Well, if you cut him off, if he dies, you obviously, you can't do that. So Abraham has a way that he's kind of got all this figured out in his mind. But it's important to know that Abraham is trusting God. Yeah. And you want to say something, Spear?
I was just another thought came into my head too. I think another little hint is when they told the helpers that were with them to stay behind that we will return to you.
Yeah.
So I think he was thinking he was going to bring you back, and they would both come back from that sacrifice too.
Yeah, and
Don't
it's
remember exactly where
it's
that
really
was at.
good if you will read verse 5, Austin. That's the verse that it says. He's telling his assistants, his servants, what he's going to do. Read verse 5 there, if you
Okay.
don't mind, Austin.
Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over here, and we will worship and return to you."
Yeah. Now listen. What is he calling? He's going to sacrifice his son, and he said, "We will go and worship and return to you." Okay. So I think that's really very, very important to realize. He's already figured out in his mind how God can handle the situation, and he really calls it an act of worship, doesn't he? We're going to go up and worship God. We're going to see God. We're going to restore my son, and then we will come back to you. So, so the Bible says, they take the wood and the stuff, and so as you read verse 6 and 7, this is very fascinating, Austin. So read verses 6 and 7.
Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?"
Okay. Now, Isaac is asking an interesting question. Okay. We have the wood. We have the fire. I mean, you didn't have,
So where's the offering, Dad?
matches, and where's the offering? And, he said, well, Abraham said in the next verse, God's going to provide. But at some point in this process, does it dawn on Isaac that, hey, I'm the sacrifice? I mean, when they get up there and Abraham prepares the altar, Abraham builds the altar, and he binds Isaac, ties him up, lays him on the altar. You had to be going, Dad, am I the offering?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, does it say something about Isaac's faith? Let's remember how old they are. Isaac is 14, 15, 16. Abraham's 114, 15, or 16. 114, 15, or 16. So, I mean, if Isaac decides to bolt and run, can Abraham catch him?
No,
I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't think so.
And the other thing is, Isaac might have some motivation to run.
Yes.
You know? I mean, it's so. The point I'm making is that Isaac is a willing accomplice in this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is like so.
It takes just as much faith for him to sit there and allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps even, perhaps Abraham even explained to him, it's going to be tough, but.
I would imagine the explanation would be in order.
Yeah, I would think so.
A good one too, a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that if humanly speaking, if this weren't the miracle, we would say Abraham's a good salesman.
Yeah, really good.
Even with faith there, normally an explanation is still
Yeah.
there. It's
Yeah.
so
And so, but it's that's a good point, Austin.
the faith is believing the explanation.
Yes. So, any rate, so we know the story. We've heard this ever since we were in Sunday school. Isaac is tied up, bound, and Abraham raises a knife to plunge it into Isaac, and then he's going to, after he's dead, he's going to burn him and stuff. And, as soon as he does that, the angel of the Lord, which is another interesting concept, we don't have time to get that, but that may very well be Christ himself, the pre-incarnate Christ, the angel of the Lord. Angel of the Lord tells him, stop, calls his name, Abraham, Abraham, here am I. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, for now I know that you fear God. How much fear of the Lord do you think is in our country right now?
Very, very small.
Yes, if any.
Yeah. They will learn to fear God.
Yes.
It might be a little late, but you will learn to fear God. And by fear, we mean respect for God,
Right.
truth. And so, so he said, now I know that you fear me and I know that you respect me. And so he looks up and he sees something caught over in the bushes by his horns. So what does he see caught? What does Abraham see caught over in the bushes by his horns?
Ram.
Right. He sees a ram over there, caught in the bushes. And so Abraham takes the ram and he offered it up as a burnt offering. So God had a substitute. He had the ram, and I always think of this, the ram was an adult male lamb. Remember the question going up, where is the lamb? Well, the lamb was caught in the bushes. That was the ram. I guess a lamb wouldn't have horns to be caught in the bushes, but, the ram would. But, so at any rate, it's really interesting because they go up on the mountain and God provides a sacrifice. Now, here's the neat part of this story. This story happens, 1900 years, pushing 2,000 years before the time of Christ. But the real kind of kicker of this story is it really is not going to be Abraham that's going to offer his son as an offering, but it's going to be God who is going to offer his son.
I was going to ask you if there was a correlation in that, because this is the man God made the covenant with to
Yes.
provide the sacrifice of Jesus
Yes.
Christ.
You got it. That's perfect. Yep. The covenant is related here, and
Should have asked sooner. I would have looked real smart.
there, all of it goes. You look smart anyway. Also, don't worry about it. But anyway, yes. So this is part of the covenant that Jesus is going to come to, and it's not Abraham who's going to offer his son, but God who's going to offer his son. And the difference is that when God offers his son, there is no ram caught. There is no substitute. Jesus himself dies on the cross and becomes our substitute. So the imagery is incredible. here you have a substitute for the sacrifice. When Jesus is sacrificed, he becomes our substitute for our sins on the cross of Calvary. So it is really just an incredible story. One other thing, in 22:14, read verse 14, and then we'll move on to the next one. If you would, Austin, read verse 14.
Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided.
And so, God will provide is the name of the mountain, Jehovah Jireh. Now, here's a real clincher, and I know our time's getting fast. But Mount Moriah, the mountain here, it's called the Mountains of Moriah, so you get some argument on this, but pretty clear that the mountain that was offered here is the place where the Temple Mount is located, where all the sacrifices took place. Kind of an incredible story, actually. Won't go into that because we won't have time to, but this is going to play out later on. So let's jump to our third question. We spent a lot of time on that one, so read the third question if you would.
All right. What exactly is the birthright that is bestowed to the firstborn son? Why is it significant that Jacob asked for Esau's birthright in exchange for food? Can you give some insight on Jacob's dream with the ladder while traveling to Haran? What is the significance of Jacob wrestling with the angel and demanding his blessing?
Okay, so clearly we've moved to our third character in the book of Genesis, the third patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, and now Isaac's son, Jacob. Very significant figure. So anyway, you remember the story that Isaac actually has an older brother named Esau, and older by minutes, seconds, whatever. So, at any rate, they're twins. But so Esau comes in from out in the field hunting, and he is just famished, and so Jacob has made some stew, and Esau asked Jacob for it, and Jacob said, "Fine, but you have to give me your birthright." Esau said, "Well, what good's a birthright gonna do me because I'm about to die if I don't eat and stuff?" And so the birthright really is the fact that the firstborn has as his inheritance a double portion. Let's say that you have two brothers, Spear, and so your dad has 400 acres. Let's say 400 acres. So if you got a double portion, you would get, instead of like there being divided, everybody gets 133 acres or whatever, divided up three ways. You get the double portion. That means you get 200 acres, and the other two boys get 100 acres each. So that's the birthright. The first guy gets twice as much as everybody else, and so he gets a double portion. So anyway, so he sold it for that. Okay, and then the second part of this question is, give some insight into Jacob's dream with the ladder as he is traveling, and the ladder where he sees the angels ascending and descending, and that is very significant because it shows that God is intimately acquainted with the affairs of man and is involved in that. And I'm cutting some out because our time is getting away from us. And then the significance of him wrestling with God and demanding a blessing from God. And there, I think, is important that Jacob got a lot of issues. His name means trickster. He's trying to trick. But whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. You remember how he tricked his dad? He traded the birthright, and now Esau can't blame himself for that. Traded his birthright for the stew. Well, then he literally stole the blessing, and with his mother's kind of encouragement, instigation, and everything. I mean, you think our families today have issues? These are dysfunctional families. I mean, they're real families. Really, this kind of gives you some hope when you look at these families in the Bible. Actually, But at any rate, what does that say about how God can use anybody? I guess
Amen.
But any rate, Jacob comes to this place where he wrestles with God. He won't let go of God. And I think one of the things that shows is do we ever, we can't let go of God, if that makes sense. Okay? We might kind of, in a sense, wrestle with God, but he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? He said, why do you want to know my name? It is too great. And so Jacob is pictured as one that wrestled with God in the sense that I'm not going to let go of you. I'm not going to let go of you. And we can't let go of God. I mean, there may be times in our life when we feel like letting go of God, but can we let go of God? I mean, we've got to come back to God. So that's really kind of it's a very real thing, but it's also kind of a picture, I think, of Jacob's life and a lot of our lives in the sense that, we have to hold on to God. Because let me ask you this. Where could you go, Austin, besides God? I mean, who else could you go to?
In the flesh, you feel like you can go to a lot of places. You can go to a lot of people, but ultimately, you can.
I mean, if I don't have God, what do I have?
You have nothing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, all I'm doing is living for today,
Yeah.
and then the day's going to be
I
gone.
mean, you got worldly things, but I mean, as we know, they add up to nothing.
Yeah.
They don't add up to anything.
And
So,
Jacob had his issues a mile long. But, and why is it that you see these two brothers and, God can use Jacob and not Esau? And if you kind of look at them side by side, if you kind of came into the camp, Jacob just kind of strikes you as this kind of weaselly little guy, just kind of, doing things. And Esau's kind of a man's man, and you're kind of like, I think like he would be the person that I would honestly be. I think Esau would be the person that I would actually be drawn to if I saw the two of them side by side. I mean, okay, let's go hunting or do something like that,
Right.
And Jacob said, let's stay home and make stew. What are you talking about? Let's go make stew. I mean, come on, man, let's go do something. So there's this kind of part of it, that I mean, if you had to pick one of them to kind of be the guy you wanted to hang around with, it would be kind of Esau. You might say, okay, I need to be careful with this guy. He might kick my rear end.
Yeah.
If I mess up or something. But anyway, he's the guy that you kind of admire and the guy that you kind of like. But Esau never finds repentance. You could say that he had a forgiving spirit at one point. Remember when Jacob comes back and meets him, and Esau comes running to him, and last thing Esau had said years earlier was, when up after Daddy's gone, I'm gonna kill you.
Right.
And I'm sure that was coming into Jacob's mind when Esau comes running with 400 men.
Wasn't sure how that was going to play out. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you got to have. Last time you heard him, he's swearing to kill you, and then here he comes with 400 guys. Okay, this might not have a real good inning. But Jacob is one of those guys. Bless his heart, he repents, but he still struggles with his old nature.
Oh, yeah.
All throughout the whole thing, and Jacob repents, and that's really kind of the key. A person that God can use is a person that sees their own sinfulness and repents of it, and changes. So I think that's kind of one of those. Let's move on to the fourth one. We'll say a lot more about that. But anyway, go ahead.
All right, moving on to Joseph seems to have a theme of dreams in his story. His dreams about it says Joseph's wife. How do you say that?
Asenath.
Asenath is the daughter of Potipharah. Is this the same family that accused him of rape and had him jailed?
The answer to that is no. That was Potiphar. This is a priest of On. This is two different people. Remember the earlier. And so, at any rate, Jacob has dreams. Let me back up and let's deal with something, though. Joseph. I said Jacob talking about Joseph. I meant Joseph, not Jacob. Joseph is one of the purest people in the Bible. Sometimes the question is asked in the Bible, who was the most godly person? Who is the person that you see with the least sin? The two that always seem to come to the top in that discussion would be Daniel and Joseph. You just don't see, much. I'm sure it's there. It's just not recorded.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see much sin at all. So Joseph is one of the purer people in the Bible, and he has these dreams, this ability to interpret dreams, and it's just like everything goes bad for him. His brothers hate him because his father loved him so much. He made him the coat and all this, and so they are going to kill him, and then they decide to sell him to this Ishmaelite caravan, and so he winds up down in Egypt. He gets a job working for Potiphar, and he's very faithful to Potiphar. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, and anyway, a false charge comes against him. He gets in prison. In prison, he interprets a couple of dreams, and the one that's released, he said, the cupbearer, tell me, and when you get out, the cupbearer forgets about him. And finally, Pharaoh has a dream of the cupbearer. Oh, yeah, there's this guy in prison that could interpret dreams. They go get him, and he comes and interprets the dream that there's going to be 7 years of drought in Egypt, and 7 really good years and followed by 7 bad years, and we need to store up stuff. So Pharaoh puts Joseph second in command in all of Egypt. So, it's kind of like, okay, finally, after all this, he winds up, kind of in a really good place. And then that's where the story gets interesting, because the famine is in all the land, and his father Jacob sends the rest of the family down there. And on the second trip, and I'm leaving a lot out, Joseph, after kind of toying with the family a little bit, reveals himself, and his dad comes down, and so his whole family winds up down in Egypt through Joseph kind of being there. So it's an incredible story that God is doing something. And then by the wife that he has, Joseph has 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And after Jacob comes down, he adopts these 2 sons, and he comes in, and he blesses them, crosses the arms. You see this kind of repeated in Genesis 3 times. Who was born first, Ishmael or Isaac?
Ishmael was first.
Okay. Which one was the one that was really in the blessing of God? Isaac. Okay, second. Okay. Who was born first, Esau or Jacob?
Esau was first.
Okay. Which one did the blessing go to? Esau or Jacob?
Jacob.
Okay. So what about the birthright, the firstborn? Well, over and over in the Bible, this is kind of, the lesser is raised up. Well, Joseph has 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh's born first. And Jacob blesses Ephraim, who was the younger one, and Joseph about has a fit, apparently. No, Daddy, you're wrong. And he said, son, I know what I'm doing. So he blesses. So in all these, you see that the second one, the last one, is actually blessed above the first one. And it's kind of a repeated theme in the book of Genesis. And I don't really honestly know, some ideas, okay, God uses the weak and the smaller, because Israel itself was a very small nation and stuff. But, anyway, that theme is repeated over and over and over again. So Joseph has these 2 sons. Now, if you look at a list of the tribes of Israel, 12 tribes of Israel, and actually there comes out to be more, because there's 12 sons, but if you look at a list of the tribes of Israel, any list of Jacob's sons, the son of his most beloved wife, Rachel, is Joseph. There is no tribe of Joseph. So how does the most important, the most prominent son not get a tribe named after him? Well, the answer to that question is, what were Joseph's 2 sons' names? Ephraim and Manasseh. You look at a tribal list, guess what two tribes you see? Ephraim and Manasseh. So the reality is, Joseph, instead of getting one tribe, got two tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the birthright again, the double portion?
Mm-hmm.
But his sons are not named Joseph. I mean, Joseph's sons are not named Joseph. They're named Ephraim and Manasseh. That's why he gets two. And sometimes the Bible refers to the tribes of Joseph, and that means Ephraim and Manasseh, both those. So, any rate,
I've never really thought about that as much. Do you think too, maybe because it was like he was sold out of the family, and then he was kind of raised in Egypt, kind of outside of the family. Like he was kind of, I guess, more of an Egyptian. So then his sons are still part of the family.
yeah, he is.
And so they were named
I don't
after
know
that.
about. I don't honestly know that, but he does have the double portion. But one thing you're 100% right about in that Joseph is totally Egyptian. That's why his brothers didn't recognize him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he would have likely had a shaved head, as Egyptian rulers had. You don't see hair and he would have looked completely the part. He would have. That's why they would not have recognized everything about him. He likely, the Bible speaks of him being handsome and well built and stuff, and so he would have had that kind of kilt around his waist and probably no shirt on and stuff like that. So he would have been an impressive figure, to say the least, and stuff. And
I'm just speculating. I just thought of that, being he really spent his whole life in Egypt and was typically an Egyptian, but not that he's outside the covenant still. But
yes, one of the interesting things about Joseph is that when they leave Egypt 400 years later, and our time's way up, when they leave Egypt 400 years later, remember they carry something out of them with Egypt. Remember what it was?
his bones.
The bones of Joseph. And so Joseph actually gets buried in the land of, remember his most prominent son, Ephraim? He gets buried in the land of Ephraim. And so, so that was kind of, it's one of those things. He said he did not want his bones to remain in Egypt. And, so his bones went to the promised land. Let me ask you this. Do you want your bones to remain in the world, or do you want to be in the promised land?
I want to be in the promised land.
Amen. How about you, Austin?
Same.
Yeah. And so think of in the resurrection, and the bodies, we have resurrected bodies and stuff. I don't want my body to stay in this old earth. I want it to be in the eternal heaven, new earth, and New Jerusalem. So our time's up. Great time tonight, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Austin. Thank you so much, Spear. And we had I know we went over time, but do read the Bible. I think you'll find these stories very interesting, very fascinating. So God bless and have a great evening.